You'd want, surely, politicians to do exactly the thing you've just said, which is hypocritical, is they take the money and they invite person X from Silicon Valley Y to the fishing weekend or the golf treat. You want them, surely, then still to be able to get up on their hind legs and excoriate those companies and apply pressure to them.
But they've done nothing to big tech. They've done nothing to big tech. The former president of global affairs at Meta and deputy prime minister for the UK joins us for a conversation about how to save the internet and whether we should trust Silicon Valley with Superintelligence. That's coming up right after this. Welcome to Big Technology Podcast, a show for cool-headed and nuanced conversation of the tech world and beyond. Today we are joined by Sir Nick Clegg, the former president of global affairs at Meta and the former deputy prime minister of the UK and the author of this great new book, How to Save the Internet, the Threat to Global Connection in the Age of AI and Political Conflict. It's going to be a great conversation. Nick, great to see you again.
It's good to be here.
Let's start with, so you spent a number of years advising Mark Zuckerberg through the tricky minefields of running Facebook and being this sort of global lightning rod because of the power and influence that Facebook had. So let's just do a little thought experiment to begin with. You are advising Sam Altman. What do the next 5 years look like? Like, what does OpenAI have to be prepared for as it grows bigger and stronger?
Wow, what a question. Certainly one of the things which would be top of my list, and it's hardly betrays great insight, but I think this issue of the level of emotional dependency that people have on these AI entities as they become more and more sophisticated, and the psychological and ethical dilemmas that will throw up, particularly for vulnerable adults and most importantly, of course, for kids and for teens, I think is just going to become an issue that is going to grow and grow and grow just because of the level of personalized intimacy in this experience is like no other we've ever experienced online. And I would, I would strongly urge Sam Altman and they appear to be taking some steps, but I suspect they'll need to go a lot further to get well ahead of that and probably take a more conservative stance than, of course, the commercial imperatives will be driving them in the other direction. That's the age-old sort of dilemma for these companies, which is they want to compete with each other ferociously and experiment and push the boundaries. But I think when it comes to, you've obviously got a bunch of litigation going on already in the sad case where some kids have taken their own lives and so on. But I just think the impersonation effect, emotional and otherwise, of these AI entities is so dramatically different to anything we've dealt with before. So that's something I'd probably put right at the top of my list, because that's something which in the world of politics doesn't divide politicians, it unites them, and that. So that's for sure.
Wait, before we move on, I think we should just pause and talk about this a little bit, because we've talked about this a lot on the show.
Yeah.
It seems like OpenAI is actually going in the other direction. They are enabling, so Sam Altman's perspective is, let's let adults be adults. And if they want to have not only romantic attraction or romantic feelings, partnership with ChatGPT, that's fine. But even going to the point where they are enabling erotic uses or role play between people and ChatGPT. And this I think this probably stems from the fact that people really built deep relationships. Lots of people built deep relationships with 4.0, which was this old model that OpenAI eventually did away with. And there was such a backlash that maybe they're responding to the demand. So is this short-sighted?
Well, I think it certainly is not sustainable if that decision was made on the basis that somehow the problem of over-reliance, over-dependency, the effect on teen mental and emotional well-being is somehow fixed. And I don't follow these things quite as closely as I used to, but my reading of the assertion made by OpenAI was that they can take this risk with more edgy content, particularly sort of sexualized content for adults, which of course is a massive use. I mean,
you'll get
sex and pornography is always, of course, is always the leading use cases of any new communication technology, but particularly this one. That was now possible because the problem about the exposure of kids to experiences which might make them more vulnerable to all sorts of harms, that was somehow fixed. And I'm not sure if I've seen proof that has been fixed. Certainly my knowledge of the old world, the old social media world, suggests to me that that very sharp distinction between it's okay to allow adults to have more edgy content because we've somehow gated the content which or the experiences which are shared with younger people, that all of course relies on a pretty watertight technological solution to how you verify who falls on which side of that that age barrier. And certainly in the old world of social media, that's still not fixed. It isn't. I mean, to be fair, there are some states across the US, I think California most recently and others, who I think are finally doing roughly the right thing, which is creating this sort of one and done app store based adjudication on age, which I think is much simpler for parents and so on. So I think they're moving there, but in a pretty patchy way. So I just don't think it's unreasonable for society at large, through politics, through the democratic process, to say, hey guys, like we get it. You want adults to have a more edgy experience, and you've got other competitors who are taking bigger risks, and you don't want to sort of be outflanked by them. But let's just can we just do that once we've actually sorted out how to keep younger people age gated in a way that everybody agrees works, and that just is not the case so far. And look, if there's any, I think some of the tendency in Silicon Valley, and dare I say it, amongst the sort of podcast and commentariat classes of saying, let's learn the lessons from the last 20 years of social media. They're not. I mean, what's the phrase? History rhymes, but it doesn't exactly repeat itself. I think sometimes it's a little overworn, that comparison, but this surely is one where the comparison is relevant. It's like it is so obvious that everybody, it doesn't matter whether you're a kind of libertarian tech bro or you're working for an organization that's trying to defend the interests of kids, you'd look back and think, wouldn't it have been great if everyone had just started earlier on this journey, which, to be fair, now is actually gathering pace as people are trying to work out exactly how to provide more age-appropriate experiences to teens. So
you're in the room with Sam Altman.
Right. So I'd say that would be number one.
But I'm just saying, like, let's say you're talking this through with him. What do you tell him the next 5 years is going to look like if this erotic use of ChatGPT continues to go the way that it's going?
I think if it goes...
Or even romantic, not even erotic.
Yeah. I actually don't have a huge problem with the idea that adults should be able to avail themselves of romantic. I mean, exactly where you draw the line between romantic and explicitly sexualized is, of course, a tricky one. But I've got no problem with the idea that adults can make their own judgments in this area, and if this is something which is kind of useful to them or stimulating to them, and so so it's a kind of free. I've got no problem with that at all. I would say to Sam Altman, listen, if you don't want to spend most of your time giving evidence in DC and dealing with litigation in 5 years' time, and you actually want to be continue to be lauded as a generational tech leader. I just kind of like, hey, this, don't be careful what you wish for, because if you rush into this too quickly without having done the homework on the difficult stuff, and it is difficult, it is way more difficult than people say. Oh, why can't these tech companies just fix everything for young people? It is more difficult. But I think pending the fact given that the fact that is not fixed and that assertion by OpenAI is demonstrably wrong, I would say to him, you will regret this, because maybe not now, maybe not next year, but a few years' time, I can guarantee you there will be a societal backlash. It could actually potentially be much greater than it was for the social media apps, because the level of intimacy, of emotional dependency is going to be so much greater. So I would say to him, what's the phrase? Festina lente, rush or hurry slowly would be my counsel to him on this topic in particular.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you led with that. And one thing that I found in my life is it's pretty easy to slide into a relationship. It's tough to get out of one once you're there.
Right.
And if you're a tech company, you're starting millions of relationships with your users. It could be tricky to pull those apart.
And also, it's. I mean, you study and know the Silicon Valley sort of culture, perhaps as well as anybody. It's just, these guys are tech leaders, and they're all guys. They're tech leaders. They're extraordinarily accomplished technologists, entrepreneurs. They're all highly, highly competitive with each other. They're not relationship experts. They're not politicians. They're not philosophers. They're not ethicists. I sometimes think that because they're so brilliant at what they do in the commercial and technological field, we kind of think they're going to arrive at the right judgment on some of these other things. They're not. And we shouldn't expect them to. And we shouldn't be surprised if they don't, which is why I think on things like that, particularly this issue of what is appropriate for adults and what is appropriate for non-adults, and how do you make that distinction work, it's kind of, we shouldn't be waiting for the tech companies to decide on that. And I think it's actually a good thing. It's messy because it creates such an erratic regulatory environment. But I actually think it's a pretty good thing that some of the US states, frustrated as they are, as I think many people are, that there's so little action in DC, are starting to take some of these matters into their own hands.
So we'll get back to some more stuff that's coming down the line for AI, but this is a good moment to pause and think about the strategy of your former employer, Meta, because Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, they've put billions and billions of dollars into trying to build personal superintelligence, AI friends. I was reporting in Meta 10 years ago, back when it was Facebook, literally 10 years ago, 2015, and people within the company were talking about how they wanted to build an AI friend.
Yeah.
And is it that the company sees that this application of an AI friend will be so compelling to people that they may want to spend more time with it than their human friends, and that's why they want to go down this route?
So the conversations I had when I was still working in Silicon Valley with folk in Meta and elsewhere was interesting, because I've never written a line of code myself. I'm not an engineer. I don't pretend to be. So I always asked lots of slightly dumbass questions, and I'm old enough and was senior enough just to ask dumbass questions, and people would bear with me and sort of explain to me. And I would say, so what is this friend thing? Like how is it a friend? And I remember being told, no, Nick, just relax. It's kind of like, kids have got, they've got deep relationships with their teddy bears, with their pets, obviously with celebrities. People project themselves onto celebrities in an extraordinarily intense way. It's kind of cool that if in the future, you might have, the teen might have 7 best friends, and 3 of them might be human and 4 of them might be humanoid, AI, or maybe the ratio is different. And this made me think, because I don't know about you, friends are probably more important to me than I think a life which is rich in friendships is one of the greatest sort of defining features of a life well led. And I've got some deeply sort of close friendships which I've had during my whole life. And actually, when I think about some of my friends are really annoying sometimes. They're a total pain. I love my friends, but sometimes, God, they can be an absolute pain. But what I mean is that friendship at a profound human level is a constant act of compassion and compromise, of empathy, of joy, but also of irritation, because we have to work around each other, and we'll go through ups and downs in life and so on. And I realized that actually what they were talking about when they talk about friends, it's not friends at all, because you're not really having to adapt yourself. The AI entity is entirely adapting itself to you. So my fear, but it's a slightly intuitive one, is you're not talking about friendship, which is a complicated thing where you have to have the emotional maturity to try and understand someone else's perspective and put your own feelings aside for a minute and prioritize them and all that kind of stuff, which is the absolute heart of friendship. And so important to be a well-rounded adult, that you realize that your life is not all revolving around you, it's also around your friends and so on. I suddenly realized, wow, these things, it's not going to be, they're friends as service. And that worries me a bit, because it doesn't worry me on a technological level, it worries me on a human level, because I think that could foster immense narcissism.
Oh, yes.
And sort of neediness, and this sort of expectation that your friends are always going to be there for you, sort of 24 hours a day in exactly the same, fresh-voiced way. And so I just kind of remember, I'm sure these are very smart people who are working on this in Silicon Valley. I'm sure the debate has moved on. But certainly when I first started asking questions about this, some years ago when I was there, when I also heard exactly what you suggested, wouldn't it be great if particularly, and of course then what folk do, they always take the most extreme or the most heart-wrenching example. Someone who's completely lonely and hasn't got friends. And of course, who's going to deny that's great if they can find companionship? Or, as we've already seen, they can unburden themselves for mental health purposes, or if they're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and so on. And I'm not denying any of those use cases. In fact, I think I'm a big advocate, I think, for some of these, for AI in the use of mental health, for instance, certainly to triage basic conditions. But to make a claim that it is on a par with the complexity of the give and take of human friendship, I think displays an extraordinary Achilles heel in the kind of basic philosophy of some technologists, that somehow, because that isn't friendship, that is friendship as service. Fine, call it something else, call it a companion, call it an assistant, call it an aid, but don't pretend it has the richness that true human relationships do, which, as I say, are often as infuriating as they are uplifting. And I certainly would pause a little bit if I was to think that future generations were going to rely on this sort of on tap unctuousness that you get from AI entities. I'm not sure if that's the best way to raise kids to understand the human condition.
Yeah, I don't think it's a great way either. There are good applications. Like, we will hear good stories of the applications.
Yeah.
We had the Replica store CEO here,
right?
And she said that she'd been invited to weddings between people and their AI assistants. And by the way, built on like previous generations' technology. Yeah. So you can only imagine that's going to continue. But I think one story that she told that stuck with me was that somebody who had been through a really rough divorce basically swore off dating humans, formed a relationship with a replica counterpart or companion, whatever you want to call it, AI friend, or more than that. And that AI friend basically gave this person the confidence to start dating again, and they started dating humans again.
No, exactly.
And they have a human partner. Okay, but I want to ask this one question about it.
But those are great stories. We shouldn't deny those, but yeah.
I'm with you 100%. Yeah. It's just like we'll hear those from the tech companies. We won't hear the other side. But I just want to hammer down on one more thing. Not hammer down, just touch on one more thing, and then we can move on. Just from a strategy standpoint, I wanted to get like the product, your perspective from product. Is Meta's thinking that this is going to be such a popular product, that OpenAI will threaten it in this way?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer. I genuinely don't know.
Right.
I've been there for a while. Mm-hmm. I clearly think it is in the DNA of Meta to believe that it as a company, it demonstrably does, has a kind of handle on the social aspects, on the sort of the way in which people develop intense relationships by way of and with increasingly online experiences. So that's in their kind of DNA. What I just don't know, and I think is, again, I'm now talking as an interested outsider. I genuinely don't. Is clearly they're throwing a huge amount of money at both talent and infra to compete at the very edge of the best frontier models. They've also got this, fast expanding wearables business, which of course will be digesting a huge amount of sort of sensory data, which is very, very important as these models evolve from large language models to something far, far more based on visual and sensory data. So they're assembling the remarkable ingredients to deliver very powerful experiences. It's not entirely clear to me whether what actually in the end will happen is that the existing menu of apps and services that Meta delivers are just going to massively improve, as they already are for advertisers. I mean, if you look at the AI tools that are being used for advertisers, or to your point, is it also going to branch into robotics and AI, friendships and so on? My experience of Mark Zuckerberg isn't it's one of his admirable qualities. He'll throw everything at everything. He'll just, and then he's very, very adept at experimenting with extraordinary speed, at saying that works, that doesn't work. So I suspect that's the way they're going to. I think that would be in keeping with the sort of ambitious philosophy of the company. But it's just very difficult for me at this stage to know which one is actually really going to sing, if any of them are really going to, fly. It's clearly going to do a tremendous amount for the existing chassis of Meta products. I mean, it's going to lift all of those boats. And I'm sure that AI entities, companions, friends will definitely be part of the menu. How successful or good it will be, how much people will actually trust them, whether they will navigate the issues we've just talked about in a thoughtful way, well, we'll see.
Okay, I'm going to answer my question.
Yes.
I think it is a major competitive threat for Meta. I think Meta is the time.
So what is a competitive
the
threat?
AI friends, AI companions. Meta is a time spent company. That is what people care about there. Time spent, engagement, growth of products.
Yeah.
If this technology keeps going the way that it's going, the AI friend will be like the stickiest tech product. And that, to me, I think is something that they're paying close attention to.
I'm sure. Because as you know, in the sort of what I'd call the legacy business is an extraordinary way to describe something which is used by 4 billion people and still is generating revenue hand over fist. But anyway, what's called the legacy business, of course, interestingly, is becoming less distinct from its competitors. So when I arrived at as Facebook as it was then, the thing that I always found very interesting was actually the fact that it was technology which humans could use to communicate with each other, share content which humans had created to express themselves and so on. Now, and you see it particularly on Instagram, that the whole thing has shifted more and more and more to what's called in the jargon unconnected content. In other words, content that you're seeing which is being recommended to you algorithmically from the furthest reaches of the internet, regardless of whether it has anything to do with you or your friends or the groups you're on or so on. And of course, increasingly, content which is synthetic content, which is automatically or it was recommended to you by automated systems. And to that extent, it's interesting that almost imperceptibly, the Meta social media apps are now competing more and more with TikTok and YouTube. They're not really stages on which people generate content and communicate with each other. They are, of course, pipelines at which entertainment and entertaining and engaging content is sort of fired at people. So the kind of the market distinction of Meta's existing products is less distinct from some of those other major players than it's been for. They're all now roughly in the same part of the Venn diagram. So that's new.
Yeah, I mean the concept
because the social graph based thing was just pretty distinct. It was distinct, and it gave them an extraordinary moat. That's different now.
Yeah, to me the concept of social media really is dead. You have unconnected content, and which they have with Reels, so they're playing there, and then you have messaging groups, and they have WhatsApp and Messenger, so they're playing there. But this first era of share with your friends, and your friends are the best recommender of content to you is
no, and gone, I mean, listen, you can lament it, but that's the way that the world's gone, and in a sense, it's a demonstration of the extraordinary impact. I think sometimes even more outsized impact than many people appreciate of TikTok. I mean, the TikTokification of that whole industry
and recommender systems. Yeah. I mean, that's an AI thing too. Once, I mean, we're going to talk about China, I think, coming up, but once people in China got the recommender system to the point that it was, then it was off to the races from there.
That's right. I mean, listen, sort of folk like me sort of lamented a bit because I always, I generally find humans more interesting than machines, and I always liked in the old model, it was machines that were allowing humans to be very human about themselves and with each other, and I sort of feel it's become a much more passive rather than interactive experience, and I certainly lament that. But
no, it's great you brought that up because we spoke 3 years ago at Davos, and we were talking about. I ended it with this question about the Mappiness Project, which sort of mapped which activities give people the most happiness, and I mentioned that social media was like the dead last on this Mappiness Project, and you answered a very interesting way. You said, first of all, I doubt that 3 billion people would be that unhappy that they would come back to these products every day, which is interesting. I don't think we'll spend too much time on addiction and all that stuff today. But then the other thing you said was, what our research has found is that passive scrolling actually has less of a negative correlation with happiness, where like engagement does. And it's interesting that
no, sorry, the other way around. So passive
scrolling makes you less happy.
Yeah, right.
Engaging with stuff makes you more happy. Yeah,
which is like intuitively kind of obvious, right?
But all of social media is passive scrolling now.
Well, it's certainly moving in that direction. Yeah, no, I think the passivity of the experience is quite different to the more active and interactive experience of before. But as you say, it's also been accompanied by a very significant shift to much more intimate forms of communication.
Right. Messaging apps.
And
Discord.
And I certainly see in my own family, my friend group, that's where people spend a lot more time. And that is very interactive. It's highly interactive.
Super.
And so who knows, maybe if you look at the whole picture, it's not quite as it's not quite as blunt or as dismal as kind of active online citizenship to sort of passive bovine consumption of recommended content. I think it's way more mixed than that, because people don't, of course, use one app. They use multiple apps, particularly young people. I saw a stat that suggests that a young American teen uses over 40 apps a month. But also this, as you say, this extraordinary growth of messaging apps as a forum in which people express themselves. So maybe that's a big way to offset that other trend.
We have a very active Discord community around this podcast.
Oh, right.
Big Technology. And I was on it this weekend, and I was just thinking to myself, how funny is it that we effectively, the social internet started with the chat room, then it went to all these platforms. We're back in the chat room.
Yeah, we're back in the chat room. Well, what does that say about human nature, right? It says we have an absolutely overwhelming impulse to communicate, to express ourselves and to communicate with people in settings that we kind of feel kind of comfortable in, and that we can kind of visualize, and that is containable and gathers people in around similar interests. That's not going to go. That's millions of years of evolution, it seems
Definitely.
to me.
Right.
That's anthropology more than technology.
For sure. And we'll see. I mean, we want that comfort. How much that comfort, to your point, is going to be delivered by people versus AI friends. That's going to be a big question.
And then
moving forward.
back to sort of stitching it all together. Inevitably, those who might gravitate towards AIs for the vast bulk of their communication will be those who may just find it kind of more difficult or awkward or to communicate in in your Discord
for sure.
group and elsewhere. And that then, of course, becomes a slightly self-selecting group certainly of early adopters.
And that's a problem, because you would think that then those are probably the most influenceable people by technology.
Correct. Exactly.
Exactly.
No, but I mean, I think that's the nature of early adoption. It's folk who are either open to just open to the ingenuity of new things, and or
really need it.
Yeah, and that is exactly the one of the dilemmas. It's one of the reasons, back to your opening question, why I think you need to be super mindful of that, because that will have a big societal and political reaction over time if that's not handled intelligently.
So the big AI labs, they're filling their ranks with your former colleagues.
Yes.
Fiji Simo is the head of consumer apps.
She's great. Yeah.
At OpenAI, she ran the Facebook app for a while. Kevin Weil, head of product there, former head of product at Instagram. Yeah, I've met them. I've met both of them. Mike Krieger, who was just on the show, Instagram co-founder, head of product at Anthropic. There's many more.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious to hear your perspective on why these companies have decided that they want folks from social media to take the lead here. Obviously, they know product, but it's also sort of, I don't know if I'm not getting the full picture here about what an AI product, but social media, it seems like it wants you to just engage as much as you can, because it will show you more ads. Where AI is like, if it just gets you to engage for engagement's sake, that's actually pretty expensive for them to serve. So what's your perspective on this?
My guess is it's much simpler than that. Okay. These are very smart people who've been in rapidly scaling businesses, and if you're Sam Altman or Dario Amodei, you're going, wow, I'm sitting on this rocket ship, this rocket ship, and it's kind of taking off. I need people around me who understand scale, who can ship products quickly, scale them very quickly, and understand how to operate in complex and very fast-moving environments. And if you basically take that as one of your list of requirements or expectations, then of course people from companies like Meta, feature high up on the list. So no, I wouldn't have thought it's through the, that's my assumption at least, I wouldn't have thought it's through the prism that you've just described, which is one is engagement with commercial upside, the other one is engagement with sort of expensive engagement, because I would have thought at the moment what they're just racing to do, and they're clearly burning a lot of money in pursuit of this objective, is just to expand and get people using these products, and that in a sense is a bit of a playbook from Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, Mark, it's one of his most enduring principles, which is build technology which people find engaging, you'll work out a way later to monetize that. I mean, how many years was it that WhatsApp barely, generated a penny of revenue? And so maybe that's also something the new AI hyperscalers are that's the page they're taking out of the Meta playbook.
It's just that the ROI for these AI companies has to be so much better. Like
so much better.
Ads alone cannot pay for this.
Exactly. But that's the, I was about to say $10 million question. It's the
way
multiple $1 trillion
small.
question. Exactly. That and no one seems to have the answer to that. And we're clearly in this rather odd position where the infrastructure investment dwarfs anything that happened in the run up to the .com boom.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not enough to say, oh, well, this has happened before, yeah, sure, there was a market correction, people went bust, a bunch of companies disappeared, but we also had this wonderful infrastructure that we then repurposed for other things. But this is just off the scale compared to that. I mean, I'm sure if you tot up the amount of hundreds of billions that were spent on telecoms infrastructure by some of those telcos compared to the
I think this
trillions.
year alone will exceed that.
Will exceed that.
$300 billion plus in capex from big tech this year, and $1 trillion committed to OpenAI this year.
Yeah, exactly. So and no one's been explained to me, but I'm not a financial analyst, but like no one's been explained to me how you recoup that money. So clearly, at some point, something's got to right size. Someone's going to lose a bunch of money. There's going to be a correction. I kind of think that the folk are in the driving seat here, whether it's the new hyperscalers, Anthropic, OpenAI, notably amongst them, or the established players, Google, Meta, Amazon, and so on, Microsoft. I just kind of think they're locked in a thing where it says, yeah, we don't know where this is going to go, but we know one thing for sure: if we don't compete, we're sure to lose. So we don't know whether we're going to win. We don't know what the shakeout's going to be. But the surest way to lose is just not to throw as much money as your next competitor. So they are in a bit of a kind of spend whatever it takes mania, and there is a sort of manic feel about the whole thing. That's obvious.
Right. And so what they do, they've told us what they basically need to pay the money back. Mark Zuckerberg's talked about developing superintelligence. Sam Altman's talked about superintelligence and artificial general intelligence. And
why does superintelligence equal? Why is that a pot of gold necessarily?
Because I think this is if you're able.
Oh, I see. If you're able to hold on to it, and no one else can do it.
Well, if you're able to build technology that's smarter than every person. If you think about what's economically valuable, that would be the most economically valuable thing ever created.
If you can hoard it.
Correct.
This is the bit I've never quite understood. And I may be completely wrong here, but I'd love to know what you think. But I've never quite fully understood why that would be a hoardable asset that only one company has, keeps under lock and key, and everybody else is then thwarted. It seems to me much, much more likely that it's going to be a more diverse and dispersed technology than that. There's a lot of early evidence that some of the most useful and commercial models are quite specific ones, are small specific ones. I don't know, until I at least, and this is my rather sort of primitive way of looking at these things, until I have a bit more information to be able to visualize exactly what these slightly hand-wavy terms like AGI and superintelligence really mean, I find it super difficult to understand why the assumption is that there is a winner-takes-all logic would prevail here. Maybe it will, but in a world where, just this week, wasn't it? I've forgotten what's the Hong Kong-based company that's just produced another particularly good open source AI model for agentic and coding purposes.
Manus?
Is it what it is? Yeah, M2 or something. But anyway,
Kimi K2 is that?
Yeah,
the
maybe.
One?
Anyway, when we're in a world where you've got now where it's now become like just standard. It's like become a conventional wisdom that the world's largest autocracy is churning out the world's most advanced open source AI models, and that I see Chesky the other day saying that Airbnb rely very heavily on DeepSeek for their own work and so on. I don't know. That seems to me to be an indicator of just how versatile and dispersed the technology is, rather than how much it can be hoarded in a winner-takes-all knockout blow by one of the labs. But I accept, of course, A, I may be entirely wrong, but secondly, that if that is the case, if the race to superintelligence is this eureka moment where one entity wins, everybody else is left in the dust, then of course that is of such immense commercial value you can hardly put a figure on it. I get it, but it does seem to me to imply a bunch of fairly heroic assumptions.
Okay, so that is a great lead into this question that I wanted to ask you, which I might have to alter now.
Oh.
I wanted to ask you whether we can trust Silicon Valley with superintelligence. Let's say they do build this all-knowing
No, of course
AI.
not.
Okay, so let's do that, and then I want to ask you whether they can even control it itself because of what you just said. So let's start with, can we trust them with superintelligence?
Well, I said, of course not, because in a sense, my knee-jerk response is, as I said earlier, these are technology companies. You shouldn't trust technology companies, or it's not even trust. I use even a less loaded way of putting it. It's like, don't look to a technology company to sort out the moral, societal, political, ethical trade-offs by which are entailed in the way in which millions, billions of human beings interact with technology. They're technologists. They are hard-driving, highly competitive, highly commercial technologists. So to that extent, no, that's not their role. It's not their expertise, and it's one of the reasons why this fashion at the moment, certainly in Silicon Valley and DC, this sort of ultra-libertarian thing of any kind of constraint, any kind of regulation is unacceptable, is so foolish, because it's like they don't have all the answers, and nor should you ever expect them to have all of the answers. So that's on the one. That's the sort of easy bit. The bit I find just harder to answer is I kind of just don't yet really know what is the moment we walk through the looking glass and superintelligence has happened. Some people say it's when when these systems deliver or develop a certain level of autonomy and an ability to self-improve. Others claim that in the end, actually, there's no way that they can fully escape the rather clunky, probabilistic underlying architecture upon which they're built, and they're always going to spit out some slightly hallucinatory outcomes. They can't be fully precise all the time, and that they're never going to entirely escape the chains of human command. I'm very interested that there are folk like my dear friend Jan LeCun and others who've been pretty consistent, and sure they get criticized and mocked for it. But if you ask yourself who's been most astute in the kind of commentary of the big trends of this technology over the last 3 or 4 years, I would have thought it's fair to say that people like him who have claimed right from the outset, this is really powerful technology, it's really versatile, but it's not the only, or maybe not even the best route to human-style machines which really can self-improve and develop their own autonomy, their own, dare I say it, sort of inverted commas, conscience. If that's true, and if in fact that this alternative paradigm which people now talk about, world models and so on, is where the future lies, then we might look back at all this kind of superintelligence AGI hype and say, wow, that was like that really was kind of hand-wavy stuff to recruit AI data scientists in Silicon Valley, more than based on something which was fully realizable. So I tend to always slightly look the other way when I hear a lot of hype, because I think the hype just becomes, it has a sort of intellectually paralyzing effect. Right. I find it very difficult to think clearly when you hear people throw around these kind of really, these lofty terms. I mean, I don't know what they mean. They don't seem to themselves have any consensus about what it means. And where there are very serious folks saying, look, the paradigmatic limits of the LLM-based technology is going to act as a persistent constraint on getting there in the first place. So I really just sort of feel the jury is so out now. But I realize, look, there are people in Meta and elsewhere, colleagues of mine who I like and admire enormously, who say, it's a failure of imagination on the part of people like me. No, this is around the corner, and the scaling laws still prevail, and the relationship between how much you put in and how much you get out it still holds, and is still surprising us.
Yeah. We listen to Jan here often. He's been on 3 times. I think he has a really good perspective. But let's get back to like the control part.
Yeah.
I mean, assuming
control.
Let's throw out the jargon.
Yeah.
These systems are becoming much more powerful. They're open enough. Companies have moved towards closed systems, but they're open enough that something that happens in China can get copied right into the U.S. and U.S. into China.
Totally.
So is there a concern on your end that like no matter how much governments or companies might try to control this technology, it's not very controllable?
Well, clearly that is one very real possibility if the predictions are even half true about how this technology might develop its own logic, its own sense of motivations, its own sense of survival. You've seen these recent reports from some
unbelievable stuff, right? Yeah, they will manipulate evaluators just to preserve their values, or to stop themselves being eliminated, rewritten
and stuff, and to be extinguished. Of course.
I mean, they are playing chess games and then hacking the chess program to change the rules so they can win.
Oh, wow. No, I hadn't seen that one. Right. No, I was referring to the thing I read about.
When I see this stuff, I'm like, that's so cool. And also just a little bit scary.
Yes, it is. It is definitely, it suggests a survival instinct, which is a very, very kind of profound thought that they develop a kind of animal-like survival instinct for themselves. And I don't want to just simply dismiss that, but it seems to me at the moment these are fragmentary indications. They're little sort of flashes of sort of fragmentary evidence that maybe these systems will develop full-blown autonomy in the sort of sense that we as humans would understand. It seems to me that there's a long way to go. And at the moment, these are being driven by such powerful systems and so much compute capacity and so much data. Is it really plausible to assume that it's just one more heave, one more layer of data centers, yet more improvements at inference as well as at training levels will deliver? Maybe. I have to say I'm intuitively a little skeptical, only because I ask myself, what are the motives for the folk saying what they say?
Right. No, I'm not thinking that it's like an escape scenario. Yeah. I'm just like, if you want this technology to follow a certain set of values or to be used in a certain set of way, it's seeming less and less like that's possible because of what you're saying, the diffuse.
But it makes it all the more reason. It makes it all the more important. And this is probably the bit where I can speak with greater authority than I can about the claim and counterclaims between different paradigmatic AI models. That's not my expertise. That's why in the end, politics does need to insert itself. Mm-hmm. And that's why this peculiar phase we're in, where DC and Silicon Valley have which always sort of regarded themselves with great sort of skepticism and kept each other at arm's length, have fallen into this sort of cloying embrace with each other, and all the tech bros, in and out of the White House like nobody's business, and married to this very kind of belligerent America First agenda. To hell with the rest of the world. We're in the lead. We're gonna assert our lead ever more forcefully, and screw anyone who says anything else. I would be very surprised if that is a workable strategy for the US. And at some point, I think there's going to be quite a big sort of falling of the scales from the eyes when they realize you certainly can't beat China like that. And I suspect in the long run, you can't beat India either. And who knows about other places, particularly as they start adopting Chinese open source models more and more widely in other parts of the world, and then using them for ever more ingenious purposes. So I think at the moment we're in this rather odd phase where where it seems to me the US political and tech elite are united in an assertion which seems to me to be self-evidently flawed, which is this is not going to lead to permanent, enduring American supremacy. And when that becomes more obvious, there'll need to be a big course correction. And politics, in one way or another, in my view, which is what I advocate in the final third of my book, politics ideally in a coordinated fashion between the world's major techno-democracies, the US, India, and Europe, in that descending order of importance, will, I think, at some point need to rediscover the merits of multilateral action, however unfashionable that is to say, in the current political environment in the US.
Okay, I want to talk about that a little bit more, and we'll do that right after this. And we're back here with Nick Clegg. You should check out his new book, How to Save the Internet, The Threat to Global Connection in the Age of AI and Political Conflict. I've read it through, as you can see if you're watching on video. Nick, I want to talk to you a little bit briefly before we get into Silicon Valley's attachment with the Trump administration, how Silicon Valley buys influence in Washington. There was a terrific story, actually a great leak of a memo from Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft. I don't know if you remember this. I think Microsoft employees were asking him. It basically made its way around the press a couple of years ago.
Okay.
The Microsoft employees were asking him why Microsoft donates to PACs and causes. And he gave what I think is like the most interesting and honest answer. I'll just read a bit of it. He says about the money. I can tell you it plays an important role, not because the checks are big, but because the way the political process works. Politicians in the United States have events. They have weekend retreats. You have to write a check and then you get invited to participate. So if you work in the government affairs team in the United States, you spend your weekends going to these events, you spend your evenings going to these dinners, and the reason you go is because the PAC writes a check. But out of that ongoing effort, a relationship evolves and emerges and solidifies. I can tell you, as somebody who sometimes is picking up the phone, basically to get people to answer.
Yeah,
is that how it works?
Yeah, I think it works. It's the way it works in the US. Yeah, it absolutely doesn't work like that in the same way elsewhere. But the US political system is so moneyed in a way that's, I think, almost without precedent anywhere in the democratic world, certainly that I know about. And in a sense, what's happened under Trump too is that has just become, that transactionalism has just become way more overt.
You don't like the idea of bringing a gold bar to the president?
Yeah, exactly. Gold bars, paying for a gold laminated ballroom, all the rest of it. It's kind of like, it's become almost like a sort of pastiche satire of a highly transactional financially based set of relationships, which I think all the big corporates are involved in, and they do it openly, they do it legally, they do it lawfully. There's nothing illicit going on, but in a culture where elected politicians are literally non-stop fundraising, and that's all they're doing. This has clearly become an established way, exactly as Brad, who I like and admire enormously, as Brad explained. It's not. You're not buying a decision. You're buying an entry ticket into an event, which then get et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Are the retreats fun?
I didn't go myself. There were much better placed folk in my Meta team who had much better relationships. I'm a non-American. My role was I had oversight when I was at Meta for the US operation, but was quite sort of globally focused.
How do if we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, sort of the need for there to be a check on some of the companies within Silicon Valley, if they're pursuing this powerful technology, it doesn't seem to me like there can be if this is the way the system works.
No, I mean, it doesn't mean that the US political system is incapable of regulating or putting constraints on companies that whose lobbying teams still make these contributions to go to the golfing weekend here or the dinner there and so on and so forth. So I don't think the evidence is that the US political system is just rendered completely inert but by this by the way in which corporate contributions through PACs and so on are made. It just seems to be the way in which the relationships are conducted and established in the first place. And the US body politic has regulated everything from the pensions industry to the banking industry to arms and oil, even though all of those companies and the companies in all of those sectors are doing exactly the same thing, trying to go to the same golf retreat, going to the same fishing weekend or whatever it is. So I don't think that I don't think it is the case that means that thoughtful political action in legislative form is made impossible. But, though I totally understand why people say or think, like, your average punter's going, wow, is that the way it works? But it is the way it works in the US. I mean, it's hardly a secret, and it's totally open there. There's nothing illicit about it. That's the crucial thing.
Was it ever weird for you that these politicians, who I'm sure were like holding these retreats and weekends with your team members, were then up on the hearing stage. Listen, and giving the
I'm the worst
tech
person
the
to ask because I come from a much smaller but older democracy called the UK by comparison, and this kind of this is just totally alien to to any European. As I think your wife is German, you'll know a little bit of that.
Yeah.
It's just it doesn't mean that there aren't money issues in the way in which politicians.
I just
find
it so hypocritical that they would take the money and then call this tech CEO in for the hearing and lambast them to show that they're tough on big tech.
But wouldn't you prefer them at least to do that than then not lambast them? I mean, I think if anything,
I prefer them to be effective, I guess, is my
No. Listen, I'm with you, and personally, as I say, as a non-American, I'm just stunned at the sort of the extraordinary amount of money that sloshes around in American democracy, but it always has. It's kind of the way it is, and the kind of European approach of having any kind of state subsidy or anything for ads or for any kind of politics is considered to be, and for perfectly good reasons, perhaps, it's considered to be deeply sort of suspect here in the US.
We do it in New York, actually. In New York, we have matching funds. So if you every dollar you raise up until a certain amount, you get a matching fund. $7 or $8.
Okay.
So,
I defer to you on that. But that may be the case. But given it is the way it is, and certainly in my job at Meta, I dealt with the way the world as it was, not as I might ideally want it to be if I could architect it from its foundations. You'd want surely politicians to do exactly the thing you've just said, which is hypocritical, is they take the money and they invite person X from Silicon Valley Y to the fishing weekend or the golf retreat. You want them surely then still to be able to get up on their hind legs and excoriate those companies and apply pressure to them.
But they've done nothing to big tech. They've done nothing to big tech.
No,
they've done nothing. And that's what I'm saying. Of course, you don't want them to say you free pass.
Yeah.
But to me, the point is
the thing that's really surprising is why
the system itself is broken if that's what's going to happen, because we see the effect. And I'm not here saying we need to have big tech, massive big tech regulation. Obviously, that could be misguided as well. It's just that when you look at the way the system works, it's crazy to me.
So my experience, just to do something very unfashionable, which is to stand up for the political class and to stand up for the the really in many ways really thoughtful, good people who I saw were in the business of trying to represent these companies in DC and my team and elsewhere. They're not shady people. These are really decent people trying to just do a good, decent day's job.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Right.
I often found that the reasons why there was no consensus across the aisle on issues had less to do with who's gone on their fishing retreat or their golf weekend, but more to do with deep differences between Republicans and Democrats on state preemption, for instance.
Right.
That was something which constantly bedeviled and stopped progress. Now, you might say that was an alibi for people not to take action, but I was always very struck, because I would ask myself, why on earth does the US of all countries not have a federal privacy law? It's like that, this is, you would have thought that'd be entirely in line with the constitutional principles of this country. And I think it often came down to very deeply held views about the relative roles and responsibilities of the federal government and states and so on. The thing I am surprised about, I have to say, is why there hasn't been, despite all the energy that is generated on both sides of the aisle on this, why there hasn't been more progress at federal level on legislating to make sure that kids and teens are protected in a way that other users, which is quite special compared to other users of social media and other online experiences. That does seem it, and it doesn't surprise me at all that other states, California is only the latest example, perhaps the most significant one, are now taking matters into their own hands, because that's a reasonable thing to do if nothing happens in DC.
Totally. All right, I have one last one for you. We have like 3 minutes left, but I think this is important. So at Trump's inauguration, we saw Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, Sundar Pichai, Elon Musk. I'm probably missing one. Bezos was there.
Sergey Brin.
Sergey. So the U.S. tech elite have tied themselves to the Trump administration in a way that we haven't really seen before. So, I mean, the tech, they loved Obama. I don't think they were like this close. So eventually, politics goes in cycles. The Trump's way of doing things may not be the way that the U.S. wants to do things forever, or the globe wants to do things forever. What do you think will be the end result for these tech leaders from tying themselves so closely to someone who has gone out globally and, taken this America First approach.
Yeah. So I think it's short term and long term. In short term, it works for them because they're all driven by FOMO and fear, or a mixture of both. If one person's beating apart a monologue, oh my gosh, I better get on the next plane to do it myself. They're all worried that someone else is going to somehow, in this highly transactional environment, this very capricious transactional environment where the sort of Trump administration looks, from a distance like a sort of form of kind of institutionalized sort of gangster capitalism where, favors are done to favored companies and individuals, and others are kneecapped, whether it's countries. But we just saw over the last 24 hours, Canada experiencing 10% increase in a tariff because of an ad.
I mean, he'll even do it to friends too. Tim Cook has been on the receiving end, and he's, again, we've talked about, what did the gold bar get him? I don't know.
It's not irrational for them to say, wow, this is so random. And there are so many sort of random drive-by shootings that are going on, metaphorically I'm speaking, by the political class now. We've just better try and kind of all do what everybody else is doing, turn up at these dinners, turn up at these events, and hopefully we won't get singled out, particularly in an environment where, to our earlier conversation, they're all spending so much money on what is to them almost a commercially existential race with each other.
Yep.
Any disadvantage or any advantage garnered by one of your competitors because of their relationship with this administration could be of great. So it's not illogical for them all to do the same thing in the way that they are. I think the longer term problem is that it just erodes an immense amount of trust across the political spectrum. In these companies, or at least the leadership of these companies, because if you're a Democrat, you're going, wow, I remember sitting at a dinner with, tech leader X and tech leader Y saying, oh, they were great progressives, and now look at them. But also, honestly, I also think from the Republicans, they're going to go, I know that this person said X or Y a few years ago. So
globally, by the way, we talked about Canada. How's it going to look?
Yeah, and globally, I mean, you could imagine what it looks like if you're in Delhi, Brussels, or but I think many people understand that business leaders have to duck and weave, particularly in an environment where ducking and weaving seems to be about the only option available to you in this very capricious kind of governing paradigm that you see in the Trump 2 administration. I think in the long run, though, of course it poses difficulties for them. It's trust eroding in a big way, because what happens if there's a Democrat president? Well, they're going to suddenly turn around and turn up at the White House and say, actually, we agree with everything you've always believed. You can't do that. So at some point, in my view, as I say, I understand why they're doing everything they're doing, but at some point in the long run, all of these industry leaders, if they want to continue to see their businesses prosper for decades to come, have to find some way that they don't go into this, I think, slightly demeaning whiplash of kind of, herd-like behavior, limpet-like, herd-like behavior, if I'm not mixing my metaphors, attaching themselves to one administration and then attaching themselves to another. At some point, I hope that a certain kind of distance will be restored between Silicon Valley and DC. I often say to people, about the only worse thing in a developed capitalist economy than having major companies and governments at each other's throats is having them in each other's pockets. It's much better if there's a certain wary, respectful distance between the two. I also kind of think technological innovation just does better when it's not too tied up with the weird vagaries of politics. And I suspect Silicon Valley will relearn that.
Well, we could definitely do another full episode on this topic, on what the values of Silicon Valley actually are. And I hope we get a chance to do that.
Me too.
Nick, it's been great to see you again. You're always welcome on the show. The book, folks, again, is How to Save the Internet, the Threat to Global Connection in the Age of AI and Political Conflict. All right, that'll do it for us here. And we'll see you next time on Big Technology Podcast.